Welcome back to the discussion, Putting the Cloud to Work in Government, sponsored by Leidos on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. My guest today, Keith Johnson, Chief Technology Officer and Chief Engineer, Defense and Intelligence Group at Leidos. Your moderator, John Gilroy. We know, Keith, marketing professionals in the commercial world claim that if a person cannot load your website in 3 seconds, they bounce out of there. Just 3 seconds. Think of that. They also claim from Google that 51% of all searches are done on mobile devices. This is putting quite a burden on our federal listeners and our federal website developers, isn't it?
It certainly is. It certainly is. User experience is absolutely critical in order to really deliver effective services to customers. And so that it really starts with taking a user-centric design and cascading that through the process of delivering web services to clients. This is where cloud can kind of help in some ways. In particular, we've all been on websites that are inundated with requests and get really slow, right? So what the cloud can help you do if you design your application and web service correctly is that can scale as more users come on, as the load increases. The cloud can help scale applications so it delivers the exact same performance, even though there may be a peak. Think of like a tax season. You want to be able to deliver a consistent service, irrespective of the amount of users who are hitting a system. Historically, that's meant over provisioning your infrastructure to meet that critical metric. Now you don't need to really worry about that as much, as long as you architect your web service correctly. The other area that you can to deliver good web user experiences is continuing to test. How well is your service delivery accepted in the response rate? And you can do that through various means. I mean, the traditional one is A/B testing, where you're constantly tweaking, changing the design, getting feedback, understanding was the expected response the anticipated response, and then you can then use that into a iterative design process to ensure that you are delivering on that user experience. The other thing that federal agencies have to deal with is making sure that they're compliant with accessibility, and so we've been working with the groups like 18F, who have generated 508 compliant style sheets to ensure that we meet the accessibility guidelines. An example that we at Leidos generated is the identitytheft.gov website. That's something that we delivered and really follows not just accessibility standards, but the clean kind of modern style that users are expecting to see. We don't want our federal customers to have a web presence that significantly deviates from how those same customers receive other services from the commercial world. And so we're always looking to see how can we make sure that we're bringing the best from commercial while meeting the accessibility and compliance standards that the federal agencies need to abide by. In
the commercial world, I have companies that call me and they have a WordPress site, let's say, and they want to speed it up because it's slow. And the utility I like is a utility called Smush. Now, in the commercial world, just throw anything out, it works. In the federal government, wait a minute here, it has to comply. There's certain cybersecurity standards, and we have to take and what about this style sheet and everything else? So some of the tools that you are allowed to use with our federal listeners aren't as flexible as some of the tools in the outside world, are they?
They're not. And you do bring up cybersecurity, which is very important. The challenge that the federal agencies have is when we go to maybe generate a new service, there is a data ownership and an issue around who needs to approve let's just focus on cybersecurity. Who does the approval process? Typically, that organization doesn't live within the same group as the organization that wants to deliver the service, and so what happens is they lack context. When you lack context and you want to do something new, it takes a long time, and that's where we see slower evolving capabilities and services in federal government. But federal government's not alone in having to adhere to very stringent cybersecurity guidelines. Take the banking industry. I would assert that they have as strong or stronger cybersecurity requirements, and yet they have been able to innovate in like mobile banking apps to allow access to very sensitive data without the multi-factor authentication process. So what we've done in the website that I mentioned before, identitytheft.gov, is we've followed those models where we use text-based authentication to enable access to that information instead of the traditional kind of two-factor authentication methods, which is very difficult, especially on a mobile device.
Yeah. So if someone's listening to this, they can go to that site and say, well, let's see what he can do. It's kind of a proof of concept here.
Exactly.
Because you can work within the restrictions, limitations of the federal government. And by the way, people who are, for example, financial consultants, they're extremely limited what they can email, what they can put on social media. So a lot of parallel problems in the private world, aren't there?
Yeah, I like to advance that Conway's Law, which basically says we build systems and applications that mimic the organizational structures that we have is in play. So if you are an organization where cybersecurity approval process is separate from the organization that needs to develop a system, you're likely going to have a lot of tension, and it's going to result in very slow evolving capabilities. What we advocate is cross-functional teams. It's really going back to the basics, where they are empowered to make the decisions to deliver the service that's required. If you have a team that's composed of the developers, the infrastructure providers, cloud security, and other cybersecurity functions all together, they have the ability to innovate and to deliver a very effective service while adhering to all the requirements that we as federal agencies have to live by.
And usually with groups like that, it's more of a social challenge than a technical challenge, because I would say sometimes the cybersecurity people may be a little finicky and have to work with them in many aspects, don't you?
It all comes back to context.
Yeah.
Cybersecurity professionals are under extreme pressure to ensure that data is protected and that people's livelihoods are protected. So they take that job very seriously. The issue that we have, the constraint that we're all working against, is the fact that new technologies are rolling out all the time that make it easier to deliver those services. And our cyber professionals have to be part of the process of developing and innovating in order to ensure that we are all on the same page of being secure but delivering effective services.
I'd like to thank today's guest, Keith Johnson, Chief Technology Officer and Chief Engineer, Defense and Intelligence Group at Leidos. I'm John Gilroy on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsradio.com and search Cloud.